and light of our brother, Bob Vessey. Amen. At this time, I would like to invite Reverend Rodney Gist and Reverend Dick Pittenger and Reverend Don Veglahn to share their witness and their memories of Bob Vessey.
I think she hit it on the head when she was talking about he was a master with words. Now, if your car broke down and you wanted something done with that, or if the screen door came off, he didn't know one end of a screwdriver from another. What a perfect man. But he was president of the Poetry Society of the state of South Dakota many years. Blue Ribbon Verse is probably his best. For 20 years, he won a contest in South Dakota State when they would have a poetry contest at the state fair. Whenever they went anywhere, it was always Bob and Helen who went, and Bob and Helen to whom they said goodbye. And my favorite of his poems, he can take words like bricks, if you lay a lot of bricks, and he can build an Empire State Building just about every time he writes a poem. This one I like, Reduced Overhead, because it reminds me of the way we pastors use our wives sometimes. We expect them always to go out with them, but they always have to use the old hat, and the old winter coat, and the old shoes. Yeah. I think that was true when he said reduced overhead. He had a great wit for puns. The pastor's wife examined last year's hat, observed the signs of wear, and gave a pat to straighten faded ribbons hanging down, then brushed the brim and smoothed the dented crown. The drooping pheasant feather was restored to pristine posture, tilted up toward the sky, in which a ringneck met its doom to crown her ancient bonnet with a plume. She preened before the mirror in the hall. When all was right, she snatched the phone to call her husband, who last night at supper said, "Find some way to reduce the overhead." When I asked what Bob would want me to say in a eulogy, which is to speak good words for him, the words came to me, put in a good word for Helen. And here's the feather for you. When we say Bob and Helen.
I began my relationship with Bob Vessey in awe of him. My first introduction to Bob came in my first visit to Brookings High School when, as a member of the graduating 8th grade class of Durham School District number 7, south of Brookings in Moody County, we came to visit VHS in April of 1939. Bob Vessey was the outgoing president of the student body 73 years ago. I saw him as a suave, polished speaker as he spoke to us that day. And he was. I come to the end of our earthly relationship more in awe of him now than I was so long ago. As I came to love Bob as a brother with the same kind of personal affection King Saul's son Jonathan had for David long ago. Pastor Lynn Hagan shared a story a few days ago. An experience he had with Bob that influenced my choice of words today and length of words. Lynn was in a covenant group with Bob and other Methodist pastors in which they shared an experience of positive reinforcement, where each group member would sign his name at the top of a piece of newspaper. And then everyone listed on every sheet Then everyone listed on the back of the sheet their positive statement as to what they believe to be their most important personal talent. And Bob wrote just one word: brevity. I'm sure that's your prayer this morning, but those of you who know me best know that that's never been one of my gifts. But because I know you didn't come here this morning to hear me speak, I've written down every word beforehand, so to keep me confined, as it were, because I could talk for hours about experiences that Bob and I have shared that go far beyond the lofty thoughts mentioned so far. I will, however, mention a few. Following seminary, I was assigned to Spearfish, where my friendship with Bob actually began. My personal experience with him 69 years ago. Bob and Helen were at Veglahn Methodist, and we often visited each other. Both Bob and I believe, were frustrated athletes. And I mention that only to give me an excuse to mention a couple of Bob's accomplishments that will never be mentioned in an obituary. After retirement, Bob entered the Senior Olympics in Sioux Falls, and in basketball competition made 21 of 25 free throws. And that's even impressive. At young years, I was in awe of that. Another awesome accomplishment we shared together, Bob and I entered a two-man best ball golf tournament at Willow Run. Bob had a 36 handicap, and I believe mine was 19. I believe Bob parred 3 of the par 3s and bogeyed the other, which meant that on his own ball alone, he was 7 under par just on those 4 holes. And on the second hole, which is a par 5, I hit my second shot on the green. I hit the ball a lot further than, and made a 20-foot putt for an eagle for a net 1. And to make a long story short, we won our flight with a net 54. Now, to you non-golfers and others who are wondering what in the world is he doing on this serious day, I mention these facts not for you, but for Bob, who would want those great accomplishments to remember. Probably never see the light of day in history. In one of the early years in Bell, Bob invited me to a Democratic rally where George Governor, who had recently resigned as professor at Dakota Western University, was holding his first meeting in that county. Including Bob and I, there were 6 people there, including George. And at his book signing in Barnes & Noble a few days ago, George remembered the experience and asked me to remember him to Bob. I never got the chance to pass on the message, but now, Bob, I believe you know. I could share countless annual conference experiences, but we'll refrain, so Don will have to do that. The most important part of my message takes us back to the school years. In our junior year, Bob at State and I at BHS. Along came December 7th, 1941. As part of a military-leaning family, I was the 5th member of my family to join the service. Bob chose a more difficult route. Although he could have sought deferment because of theological training, as many of the pastors with whom he later served in the ministry, Bob felt he must register as a conscientious objector and entered into alternate service. He was assigned to a hospital for the criminally insane in the Northwest and was assigned to the ward which housed the most dangerous patients. Bob shared that on an overnight shift, he was overcome by one of the patients, choking him into unconsciousness, and he thought he was dying. Apparently, when he went limp, his aggressor released him. And it is ironic that in his conscientious objector role, he faced much more danger than I, even though I enrolled in the Navy at the age of 17, where by the time I got to the Pacific given none of the support tendered to us when we returned. After the war, he came back to Brookings and, wanting to enter the ministry, requested of this First Methodist Church, his home church, a local preacher's license, the first step into the Methodist ministry. His request was rejected. He took his request to the Methodist Church at Bruce, and happily they welcomed him with open arms, and the rest is history. He went on to Garrett, met and married Helen, and then while in Belfouche came Jonathan David and MaryAnne. As others will attest, Bob was a brilliant orator, debater, and extemporaneous speaker, faithful pastor, gifted poet, faithful husband and father, and so much more. In my last annual conference as a member of the then South Dakota Conference, it was the last conference for beloved Bishop Jim Armstrong. As MC, as he began the banquet, Bob started by saying, "Welcome to the last supper." That line brought down the house. Unbeknownst to all of us, before the next annual meeting, I would be asked to surrender my credentials, and justly so. During that 2-year exile and through all the subsequent vagaries of my life, Bob has remained a faithful and loyal friend. In thinking about his life and his witness, it seems insane to me that after thousands of years of civilization, we still find it necessary to solve international disputes by going to war. If world peace ever breaks out, and it will, overcoming the chauvinistic nationalism that afflicts all of us, it will be because of people like Bob Vessey, who passed this way with quiet grace and determined persistence. Now perhaps you better understand why I hold Bob Vessey in such awe and love him unconditionally. He is with us still. Amen.
Brilliant, articulate, wordsmith, forensic, poet, clever, witty, funny, caring, cheerful, loving parent and spouse, and wise. These are some of the words that come to mind when I think of Bob Vessey. I first met Bob when I came back to South Dakota from seminary